All right. So I always say I get the short end of the stick when I have to do this talk because math is not my favorite subject, but I promise we will get through it together. So you all should have gotten a worksheet. We'll go through that together in a few minutes. So just hang on to that. So before we get into going through the worksheet, remember at the end of the day, our goal here is to figure out either how many animals we can put on a given piece of land, or if we have a given number of animals, how big does that paddock need to be for the amount of time that we want those animals to be in that paddock. So I promise this has got a practical application at the end. So just a few terms, things that get thrown out, and we're going to kind of go over some definitions. So an animal unit month is the amount of forage to support a 1,000-pound cow. Okay, now some people in this room might have a 1,000-pound cow. Some of y'all might have a little more. And calf for 30 days. So if we had, say, a 1,300-pound cow, right off the bat, she's over that one animal unit month, right? So that's about 900 pounds of dry matter, or about 90% of the body weight. So 1,000-pound animal, 90% of the body weight. That's where we come up with that 90-pound dry matter. Stocking rate is the pounds or number of animals per unit of land over a given period of time. So this is kind of compared to carrying capacity or similar to carrying capacity, it's a longer period of time. So 2 steers that weigh, say, 600 pounds for 100 days, and we've got 1,200 pounds per acre stocking rate. Stocking density, this is the relationship of animals to land at a given moment on that land base. So it's more of a snapshot in time and uses the land base that cattle are on at that point in time. So an example here, we have 40 cows that are 1,400 pounds on a half-acre strip of land. We have 112,000 pounds per acre stocking density. So that leaves them with an area of about 32 by 32 per cow. So this is a big question we get a lot, right? A lot of times when I go on a farm, if I'm looking around and saying, you know, there's not a lot of forage here, this looks a little overgrazed, usually what's going on is we've got too many cattle on that acreage. Sometimes I see the opposite problem, right, which is maybe a better problem to have, that we have a lower stocking rate and we can actually increase that number. But this is usually when I run into a situation, we get into a situation where people just try to run too many head on a given piece of land. So the stocking rate, we want to make sure that we're getting a stocking rate that's both economically and environmentally sustainable during that full grazing season, right? So keep in mind those cool season grasses, they're not growing at a constant rate throughout the grazing season. So what you might be able to put on a piece of land in the spring when we get that rapid growth is not the same amount of cattle that you could put on that same piece of land, say, in the middle of the summer. So to calculate carrying capacity, it's annual forage production times the seasonal utilization rate over how much we think they're going to eat, average intake, times the length of the grazing season. So let's go through an example here. So I said that 1,300-pound cow, right? She's really a 1.3 animal unit, right? Because that animal unit's based on 1,000 pounds. Most of our cows are more than 1,000 pounds. So keep that in mind. Right off the bat, we're at 1.3. If we assume a 90% of animal unit being her dry matter intake for the pair, right, because that assumes a cow and a calf, that 900 pounds times 1.3, we get 1,170 pounds of dry matter intake of forage. That's what we're expecting her to eat. Now, let's assume we've got 35 cow-calf pairs, plus we've got the bull out there. That bull's probably about 1,800 pounds, so right off the bat, he's about 1.8. So multiply that times how much we think they're going to eat. So 1,170 pounds of dry matter intake times 35 pairs equals 40,950 pounds, plus the 2,100 pounds or so for the bull, we need 43,056 pounds of dry matter intake per month. So if we've got an area of, if we're producing about 8,000 pounds of dry matter per acre, and we're going to take the assumption that we're going to take half, leave half, right? We're not going to graze it all the way down to the dirt, or soil, sorry, Dr. Grove. Take half, leave half. We've really got 4,000 pounds of dry matter per acre available, okay? So if we have an 80 acres of pasture, right? Not just 80 acres on the farm, but 80 acres of pasture, times that 4,000 pounds of dry matter that they're going to consume per acre, we get 320,000 pounds of dry matter. Divide that by this 43,056 that we calculated up here, 7.4 months. So multiply that by 30 days in a month. We get 225 days of grazing at 2.3 acres per pair. Okay, so I just went through all that math, and we got that really specific. Does that mean that I can go out there with my 35 cow-calf pairs and my one bull? They're all going to weigh 1,300 pounds. He's going to weigh 1,800 pounds. They're going to eat this every day, and we can roll with 225 days of grazing with 2.3 acres per pair. In an ideal situation, yes, but we know that we don't live in an ideal world all the time, right? So the whole point here is we can plan, we can do some of these calculations, and we can get in a ballpark range. But remember, we may have to adjust. If we run into a really dry spell, then we may need we may have fewer grazing days. We may need to start feeding stored forages a little earlier than we had planned. So yes, we can plan with numbers, but be flexible and be able to adjust. So we want to try rotational grazing. One of the biggest questions is how much area do I need for my cows in each paddock? That is a very real world question, and the answer is really that it's going to depend. So things that we're going to use for this exercise. Okay, well, Dr. Choich can just edit this part out on his video because it probably won't sound very good. All right. Things that we are going to use in our little example. We're going to have the number of livestock, number of head. We're going to have a weight and about how much they're going to eat as a percentage of their body weight. So those are the animal factors that we need to consider. From a forage standpoint, we need to have an idea of the available forage, how long we want them in each paddock, right? So that can change. Maybe we're going to do weekly moves. Maybe we're going to do daily moves, maybe twice weekly. In our situation here, we're going to move them they're going to be in there for about 18 hours. So we'll see that when we do the calculation. We need to know the percent of utilization of the forage that we're going to try to go after. Then we can figure out our paddock numbers. So that's really going to be based on how long we want each paddock to rest, right? If I'm doing daily moves and I only have 4 paddocks, well then in that situation, the longest rest we were going to get is 3 days, right? And that's not going to be our ideal number there, but just using that as some simple math there. Then if we start with a fixed width, this says 45 feet, your worksheet says 40. Those numbers are both wrong for our example today, so your paddocks are going to be 30 feet wide. We're just going to make them all 30 feet wide. So once we know the width, then we can solve for how much area we need. If we have the area and we have the width, we can solve for the length. So we're going back to some basic algebra here. So remember, area is length times width. I gave you the width. We're going to calculate the area and calculate the length. All right. So we need to divide you all up into groups.
Okay, we're going to number off for that. Can you help with what we're going through? Okay, Katie.
All right. Okay. So on your little handout here, you'll see the table that'll have your group number. And then each group, you're either going to target 40, 60, or 80% of forage utilization. We're all going to use the same intake, so 3% dry matter, 3% of the body weight on a dry matter basis. Each paddock is going to have 2 heifers in it. And then I told you the...
That's exactly true. I'm doing the math on that. There'll be a couple with 3.
Oh, well, now Dr. Teutsch has messed me all up. So if I come up with the wrong answer, now it's Dr. Teutsch's fault. So, okay, so some of y'all might have 3, so we'll just change that number as we go. And then paddock width, I told y'all, was 30. So the other piece of information that you need to know from me is the available forage in pounds of dry matter per acre. So I'm going to give you that number. Dr. Teutsch went out and looked at the paddocks yesterday, so they are 1,163 pounds of dry matter per acre. Okay, so the first thing that we have to do is calculate the amount of forage that's needed. So the way we do that is average weight of the animals, number of head in each group, times the forage dry matter as a percent of their body weight in decimal form. So if it's 3%, move that decimal point over 2 spots, you're going to multiply it by 0.03, and then the days in each paddock. So in our example, they're only going to be in there for about 18 hours, so we're going to use 0.75. Do we have updates?
Yeah. So
Okay.
750 pounds is your average animal weight. And groups 1, 2, and 3 each have 3 animals.
Okay.
Groups 1, 2, and 3 will be furthest from the trailer, so that's important to remember because those will be the last ones where the cats come in.
We'll remind you of that when we're in the...
Okay. All right. So, did everybody catch that? So groups 1, 2, and 3 are going to change your number of animals to 3, and then everybody change your heifer weight to 750 pounds. Okay? So, in this example, so let's go ahead and we'll do step 1 together. So average animal weight, 750 times 2 or 3, depending on which group you're in, times 0.03 times 0.75. So you should get a number a little less than that, depending if you're in the 2 head groups. Okay. So, if we're going to estimate the amount of forage available, which we've done that already for you, but we're going to walk through this. Remember, they're not going to graze everything, so we can't assume 100% utilization. They're going to use about 30 to 60% of the grass. Keep in mind, if we have dead forage, mature forage, that's less palatable to them. They're probably going to leave that behind. Fecal and urine contamination, those spots are not going to be consumed. Trampling losses, I've got some pictures a little bit later. Remember, if they're trampling over that forage, they're not going to eat it. So, just some ballpark numbers in terms of the percent of forage utilization for a continuous grazing system is about 30 to 40%. For a slow rotation of about 3 to 4 paddocks, 40 to 55%, and then a fast rotation would be about 55 to 70. So you can see we kind of went in that 40 to 80% range in our example here. So, to estimate the forage production, we can measure the height of the forage. So you guys will actually do that, I think, when you guys go out to the farm. So if the grass is about 12 inches tall on average, and we want to graze to a height of 4, so we're going to leave 4 inches of residual when we leave that paddock, then we have 8 inches of grazable forage. To estimate that forage dry matter available, keep in mind we have about 200 pounds of dry matter per inch of grazable forage. So if we had 8 inches to graze times 200 pounds of dry matter per inch, we get 1,600 pounds of dry matter per acre available. So we are a little lower than that today. In our example, we said we're at 1,163, which is not surprising considering how dry everything's been out there. So if we've got our utilization rate 30 to 70% for trampling losses, our grazing stick forage height, so again that height above 3 to 4 inches, again that's going to be about 100 to 250 pounds of dry matter per inch per acre. So we can assume, 1,000 pounds of dry matter per acre above that 3-inch standing forage. Okay, so to calculate,
They're supposed to be going through their sheet now?
yep, I'm going to go back. I realized I messed that up. So we're going to do part 2 now.
Okay.
Yep.
So here we want you to have part 1 done.
Yep, so part 1 should be done.
Okay. So what kind of numbers did people come up with? Okay.
For
so
part 1.
For part 1. So the group 1, 2, and 3 had 3 head. What number did you all come up with?
5.0625 for 3, I hope.
Okay. I think the decimal place is probably
Yep.
1.
It's off?
Yep.
Okay.
So when you're multiplying the dry matter intake, we have here 3% divided by 100. What I put in my thing was we multiply times 0.03. That would take in the dividing by 100. So 750 times 3 times 0.03 times 0.75. What did other people in group 1, 2, and 3 come up with?
50.
Okay, so 50 pounds of dry matter per your group of animals per your grazing period. How about people that had 2 animals? 33.75? Okay, now feel free to round that off to 34 to 50. So everybody's at the same, well not the exact same because we've got 3 animals and 2 animals.
Yep.
So we're going to change up a fair bit as we get into the different groups now.
Yep. So to calculate that amount of standing forage available, so part 2, you need to, I gave you the available forage, so the 1,163 pounds. Then we're going to multiply times your utilization rate. So look in the table, whether your group is 40, 60, or 80. And that's going to be as a decimal. So that decimal point needs to move over to, so you're going to be 0.4, 0.6, or 0.8.
So you don't need to divide by 100. Just go ahead.
Yep, if you just move the decimal, then you don't have to divide by 100. So what did our 40 group get?
465.
All right. What about our 60% group?
697.8.
Okay. And our 80% groups?
Now 30.4.
All right. So if we move into, now we're going to calculate how many acres that we need, okay? So if you look on your sheet, we've got these handy little arrows. So you're going to take your pounds of dry matter intake that you calculated in part 1 and go ahead and move that number down. So I think that was our 55 or 30 number, give or take, depending on how many animals you have. And then you're going to divide that by the number we just calculated in part 2. So that's going to change depending on which utilization you're in. And then you should get acres per group per grazing period. So I'm going to do some of that math with y'all. All right, so what did we get? Now, keep in mind this is going to vary across all of our groups. So if we take our 33 or 34 for our 2 animal ones and divide that by, for our 40% utilization group, you should end up with, what number did y'all get? So 40% utilization with 2 head in your group. 0.07, yep.
Quick question.
Yes.
Going back to section 2,
Yes.
how did we get the number for the standing forage dry matter,
That first number, so they actually,
given to us?
yep, we gave that to you because they actually went out to the site that we'll be at later today and actually measured that. That was the 1,163.
And Ray is gonna go over how to estimate that. Are you gonna do that inside, Ray, or outside?
I think it's gonna stop raining, so we'll be doing that outside.
So has everybody got their part 3 calculation done? 3A?
Okay, go back over what each of the groups should end up with.
Hang on, I gotta redo my numbers here.
And you may end up, when you get back to your real farm, and you just look and you say, I'm really good at my eyeballs, and this much pasture is gonna last them for 3 days. And we hope that you will get good as you do it more and more and more. But we want to kind of go through a way to calculate that. And we'll go over some other ways to make it a little bit simpler when we're in the field.
So 50.
And everyone that participates for today and tomorrow will get a certificate. You don't get a letter grade. So if your math is rusty, that's okay.
Okay, we're good. At some point, are we going to be talking about the practicality of setting up these systems?
Okay, so, okay, so for 2A, we went through all those answers. So for 3A, if you had 3 animals in your group and you had 40% utilization, you should, what should your value be? So group 1.
So they get 50 divided by
50 divided by,
What did you guys get? When I'm in an Amish crowd, and they learn arithmetic really good in their 8th grade education, they're quick on that. We've got all our phones, we've got to figure it out. So 50 divided by 0.4, what did y'all come up with?
or the 465.
No, it shouldn't be 24.
Here, this one.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yep.
Let me turn it back over.
Oh gosh, math is hard, right, y'all? All right. So group 1, what'd y'all come up with for 3A? 0.1. That's what I got too. All right, good. We'll be wrong together if we're wrong. Group 2, what did y'all come up with? 0.07. Okay. Group 3. Yep, good. All right, group 4 and group 7. Okay, group 5 and group 8. All right. And group 9 and group 6. We don't have a group 9, do we? We only went to 8. Okay, group 6. Yes. Yep. All right. So then if you follow your arrow for part B, all you got to do on that next one is take what you calculated in 3A and rewrite it down in 3B. That's all we're asking you to do there. And then we're going to multiply. So that's our acres, okay? That's how many acres we need. So that 0.7, 0.1 value, depending on what you calculated. Then you're going to multiply that by 43,560, because that's how many square feet are in an acre, okay? And so if you do that, so you make your calculation, turn your sheet over. There's a spot for you to write that number down on your next sheet.
Do you want us to use the 30 feet for what we're going to use in the field, or the 40 feet that's on our worksheet?
You're going to use 30. Yep, just cross out that 40 number altogether. Okay, so we should be calculating that square foot. So one of our groups here, I apologize, I was more organized, but then my numbers changed, so figuring this out with y'all in real time. So I know one of our groups came up with an area of about 0.07 acres that they needed, right? So how many square feet is that? Okay. And keep in mind, some of these, depending on how you round, you may be off a little bit. Okay, so do we all have our square feet? Okay. Now we need to calculate, so we've got our area, square feet. We've got our width, that's the 30 that I gave you. So we're going to solve for length. So in part 4, put in your length put in your square foot value, and you're going to divide by the width to get your length. Okay, so everybody should be dividing by 30 because every group is going to have the same 30. All right, so do we have our lengths? Group 1, what length did y'all come up with? What was that? Okay. Group 2? 101. We had 145. Group 3? All right, so if we kind of followed that, that all made sense, right? So as our percent utilization went up across those groups, so group 1 had 40%, group 2 had 60%, and group 3 had 80%, their lengths got shorter, right? Each paddock length got shorter. If we think about that, that makes sense, right? We're going to ask them to consume more of that forage. We're going to give them a smaller area to have access to. So that's good. All right, and then all we're doing in part 5 on here is really just going back and checking our math. So if we want to check our math, we can take the length that we calculated, multiply it by the 30 width that you were given, and you should come back out to the same square footage that you calculated. So just like we did in school, checking our math, checking our work, that's all we're doing here. So once we actually get out in the field, you all will get a chance to, you'll see how we actually calculated that dry matter per acre value that you were given. But we wanted to give you all an opportunity to walk through this math now so that you know what size paddock we need to build later. So, what questions do you all have? I know, it's a lot of math. I promise it'll make sense when you're out there. Yep. Yep.
In terms of determining utilization rate, is that based on how long we're planning to leave them in the paddock, or is there a way to go out there and be like, well, there's a lot of poop in the field, therefore it's going to be a lower
Repeat that
percentage?
question, Katie, so everybody can hear.
Yep, so the question was really how do we determine what our ideal utilization rate is going to be? Yeah. So a lot of determining your utilization rate is going to be based on how quickly you're trying to move them through those paddocks and how many paddocks that you have. Yep.
So generally speaking, the shorter the grazing duration, the higher your utilization rate's going to be.
Yep.
So if we're on a 1-day, 2-day move, our utilization rate could be around 70%. You know, if we're in a week move, then it'll be down closer to.
And we're not assuming you eat it all. We're assuming you leave 3 to 4 inches.
Right.
And so then the utilization, like Chris says, if you move it quick, you might get 70% that's above 3 inches used.
Yeah.
Now, we gave each group these different numbers because we just want to get you thinking about it.
Okay.
But in the field tomorrow, the people that had 80% utilization, you guys should be grazed pretty close to 3 inches. The ones with 40% utilization, then in essence, you were doing a light grazing. You were just kind of taking the top off.
Gotcha.
To piggyback on that question, I know it all depends, right, but that table continuous, slow rotation, fast rotation, how frequent is that rotation based on like that table, just the ballpark? You know what I mean? Like if you're, like what's a fast rotation?
We're saying like every day.
Every day.
Okay, fast rotation is every day, slow rotation would be,
Yes. Maybe every week.
okay.
Yeah. I mean, again, all of these are a little bit relative.
Exactly.
So then you're kind of putting in your, whatever your goal utilization is, rather than what the actual, trying to estimate what the actual utilization is, in order to figure out how big
Yeah.
your.
You could do it either way. You could say, I actually want to take it to 3 inches. I guess you're right. It's your goal or what you get from one of the charts.
The important thing to remember about this exercise is that we want you to think about forage availability and pasture. That's what we're after. This is not going to be an exact science when you're estimating this, right? So you're going to have to watch animals when you put them in a paddock, and if they're down to that target grazing height, and your math says you got 2 more days, then you need to move them. You don't leave them there another 2 days. So it's important. We just want you to understand where these numbers come from, and then really when you're in the real world in your grazing, you're going to use a grazing stick, or you're going to look at residual height, and you're going to rotate based on residual height.
And if we want to throw another kink into this, we calculated a perfect rectangle. As Dr. Grove pointed out, in Kentucky, we don't have rectangular fields very often. So just kind of keep that in mind that this is a very ideal situation that we walk through with our calculations, but you're going to get close if you do some estimation, but you're probably not going to be rotating through perfect squares and rectangles.